For this week's free lesson, I wanted to talk about taking small portions of your repertoire and turning them into exercises for the texture of the piece. For examples, I'll be using number 14 and number 15 from Giuliani's Opus 50, but you can do this with any piece that you're studying. So every piece has a texture, a musical texture. Maybe the texture is melody on top, with classical accompaniment on the bottom. Or maybe the texture is more simple and there's muted basses in there so that the accompaniment is not as prominent or not as active. So you could hear I was muting out the basses, which really tightens up the texture. So there's all these different textures in music, and when we're practicing, we need to, on the one hand, identify what the texture is so that we can work on it and refine that texture, and so we know what we're going to present to the audience and how to help the musical composition come to life. And on the other hand, it's something that we need to do in our technique. You know, our technique is not just made up of scales and arpeggios and physical activities. Technique is also building in musicality and musical balance into your hands and into the muscle memory of your hands so that you can use it in your repertoire. So let's just dive slightly deeper into each of these pieces to explore. But of course, you can do this with any piece, and I'd highly recommend that you loop very small sections. So in number 14 here, we have a melody on top. And we have an Alberti bass accompaniment. So we already know that there'll be a hierarchy there. There'll be a melody on top, then bass. So melody should be the most prominent, the loudest. The bass can be fairly resonant. And then this final accompaniment note with my eye finger should be suppressed and very soft. It's not important. We don't want it to interfere with the melody. You hear how that eye finger is just, it's audible, but not very much. As opposed to crashing out all the notes, which just sounds clunky and the melody's getting covered up by accompaniment notes. It's just too much. So that really helps bring that melody out of the texture. So we have a hierarchy there and we have something to work on. And in terms of our right hand, the way I usually approach this when I learn a new piece is that I'll take the first beat of the piece and just start experimenting. So at first I could say, let's bring the melody out a lot. And really soften everything. And then I might say, oh, I'm gonna bring out the bass a little bit more though. And then I might practice going soft and loud. And then suddenly your hand has learned how to control that texture a little bit. And then you can apply it to the rest of the piece. So, and whenever it comes up in the piece, your right hand will have some context for playing that texture. So just really diving into that refinement of the texture and making sure you know what you're presenting musically and then locking that musicality into your technique. On number 15 is a very different texture. We have an active melodic line. And a bass that, is going to, we're going to be placing our finger back on the bass to stop the bass from ringing out, which really tightens up the texture. Instead of everything ringing out, we're muting some of the basses and that tightens it up. Really different than letting all all the notes just ring out. It really changes the texture. So in this one, I might work in tiny dotted quarter note chunks. You know, making sure that when I play this upper note, that I'm muting that bass voice. Mute, mute. Or maybe I'll loop the first bar. And if I can't do it, I mean, obviously I could slow it down, but if I can't play the texture yet, then how am I supposed to go through the piece and learn all these complicated left-hand notes and be focusing on all the other things I'm supposed to focus on? I need some kind of context musically and from a technique standpoint to be able to play the piece and present the texture that I want. Because it's so hard, like sometimes we're focusing on the left hand and the chord shapes coming up and whatever notes we're supposed to be playing, that we kind of don't work on the texture very much, just like the texture on its own in a very simplified format. But if you do that, you can lock it so much into your muscle memory that really after playing just a tiny portion of the first bar of the piece, you might have that muscle memory for the rest of the entire piece, and then you can focus on the other things you have to focus on, but the texture will be you'll have made an aesthetic choice of what the texture is and how you should go about defining it and presenting it to the audience. And your music will be richer musically, and your technique will be more refined and informed as well. So it's a really amazing benefit for both your musicality and your technique and making them work really well together.